I used to believe that love announced itself with noise, arguments, laughter, slammed doors, reconciliations that felt like storms breaking. What I had with Lucas Reed was quieter than that. It moved through my days like a steady current, unnoticed until you realized how far it had carried you. We lived in a small apartment that smelled faintly of coffee grounds and lemon soap, and most evenings followed a rhythm so familiar it felt permanent. I told myself permanence was proof. Lucas had a way of making ordinary moments feel chosen. He listened with his whole body, leaning in, nodding slowly, as if the world outside our conversations had agreed to wait. When he smiled, it was never rushed. That smile had been my shelter for nearly 3 years, long enough to blur the edges of doubt. We were not perfect, but we were consistent, and consistency can masquerade as certainty if you let it. That I worked flexible hours as a freelance editor, which meant my days bent and shifted. Lucas kept a stricter schedule at the firm downtown. Mornings were brief and efficient, 2 mugs warming our hands, a shared glance in the mirror as we brushed our teeth, a kiss that said, later, without words. Nights were slower. We ate late, talked about small things, and let the television murmur while we folded laundry. If there were changes, they came softly, like dust settling. Noah Bennett had always fit into that quiet without effort. He was my best friend, the kind you collect early and carry forward without questioning why. We met years before Lucas, bonded by shared humor and a mutual talent for listening. Noah noticed details most people missed, the way a room shifted when someone entered, the pause before a lie. His eyes did most of his speaking, wide and honest when he was excited, dark and searching when he was worried. I trusted those eyes. I trusted him. When Lucas and Noah met, there was no spark I could name. If anything, they seemed relieved by each other. Noah teased Lucas about his meticulous habits, Lucas admired Noah's impulsive kindness. We became a small triangle of easy evenings and inside jokes. It felt earned, balanced. I told myself that the best relationships grow larger, not smaller. When you add the right people. Over time, subtle adjustments crept in. Lucas started staying later at work, or so he said. He kept his phone face down more often, a habit he claimed came from meetings. I noticed because he had never done that before. Noah texted me less frequently, though when we did talk, he sounded the same, warm, present, careful with his words. I catalogued these changes without alarm. Everyone adapts, that's what adults do. Doubt felt indulgent. One Friday evening, I suggested we cook together, something simple and familiar. Lucas agreed, but his attention drifted. He laughed at the right moments, yet his thoughts seemed tethered elsewhere. When I asked if he was okay, he answered too quickly, like someone eager to pass a test. I let it go. Love, I believed, required generosity with uncertainty. Noah joined us that night, arriving with a bottle of wine and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He complimented the food, asked about my latest project, listened carefully to Lucas's work stories. Still, there was a faint tension in the air, like static before a storm. I caught Noah watching Lucas when he thought I wasn't looking, and Lucas avoided my gaze in those moments. It was brief, easy to misread. I told myself I had. After dinner, Noah lingered by the window, staring down at the street. When I asked what he was thinking about, he shrugged and said the city looked different at night. Lucas cleared the table with unnecessary urgency. I felt like an observer in my own home, unsure what I was meant to notice. The weekend passed without incident. On Monday, Lucas kissed me goodbye and promised to call. He didn't. I told myself he was busy. Noah sent a short message, "Hope your week starts easy," and nothing else. The words felt careful, measured. I reread them more times than necessary, searching for subtext where there might be none. By Wednesday, a restlessness had settled into me. Not suspicion exactly, but awareness, the sense that a room you know well has been rearranged while you slept. I worked late, trying to drown the feeling in concentration. When Lucas texted to say he'd be delayed again, I replied with a heart I didn't feel. Trust, I reminded myself, is a choice you make daily. Thursday brought rain and an early end to a meeting that should have lasted hours. I found myself heading home with time I hadn't planned to have. The city looked washed clean, reflective, like it wanted to show me something. I walked slower than usual, keys heavy in my pocket, thoughts scattered. I rehearsed nothing. There was nothing to rehearse, our building was quiet when I arrived. I climbed the stairs, listening to my breath echo. At the door, I hesitated, not from fear, but from habit, checking the time, aligning myself with the version of the evening I expected. Then I unlocked the door. Inside, the apartment held a stillness that didn't belong to an empty room. I stepped in quietly, the way you do when you don't want to disturb a thought. From the living room came the low murmur of voices, familiar enough to calm me, close enough to stop me. I moved forward, heart steady, trusting the life I thought I knew. That was when I saw them, Lucas and Noah, and before either could speak, before explanations could form, Noah's eyes found mine. In that instant, the room rearranged itself completely, and I understood that I had arrived earlier than I was supposed to a truth that had been waiting without me. Time did not stop, but it thinned, stretched so tightly that every sound felt sharp. The hum of the refrigerator, the rain ticking against the window, my own breathing, each detail pressed forward as if demanding to be acknowledged. Lucas stood too close to Noah, their bodies angled in a way that suggested familiarity rather than accident. Nothing explicit needed to be seen, the space between them said enough. Lucas turned first. His face shifted through recognition, surprise, and something that looked like calculation. He opened his mouth, then closed it, as if words had suddenly become unreliable. Noah didn't move at all. His eyes stayed locked on mine, wide and unguarded, carrying a confession he didn't know how to speak. I had trusted those eyes for years. Now they undid me. That I realized, with an odd clarity, that I was standing just outside the scene, like a guest who had arrived too early to a private ritual. My coat was still on. My keys were still in my hand. Those small facts anchored me while everything else drifted. Lucas finally said my name, softly, the way you do when you hope gentleness can revise reality. Ethan, he said, stepping back a fraction, as if distance could restore order. Noah flinched at the sound. His gaze dropped, then returned, heavier now, weighed down by shame. I noticed how his shoulders curved inward, how his hands clasped and unclasped without purpose. This was not the Noah who teased me through bad days or showed up with soup when I was sick. This was someone cornered by his own choices. That I waited for anger to arrive, but it hovered just out of reach. What came instead was an inventory of memories, each one asking to be reconsidered. Late nights. Short texts. Careful tones. I saw how neatly the pieces fit when you stopped insisting on a different picture. Lucas took another step toward me, and I raised a hand, not in accusation, but in pause. Don't, I said, surprised by the steadiness of my voice. The word landed between us and stayed there. Lucas froze. His eyes searched my face, as if looking for instructions. He had always been good at reading me. That skill failed him now. Noah swallowed hard, his jaw tightening as if he were bracing for impact. I can explain, Lucas began, the sentence reflexive, rehearsed. That I nodded once, not because I agreed, but because nodding felt easier than speaking. Explanation implied a future where this moment could be arranged into sense. I wasn't ready to offer that. The room felt smaller, its corners pressing inward. I became acutely aware of the couch, the lamp, the photo on the shelf of the three of us at the beach last summer, all smiles and careless light. It felt like evidence from another life. Noah finally spoke my name, barely audible. Ethan. I looked at him then, really looked, and saw how tired he was. Not just tonight, but in a way that suggested a long negotiation with himself. His eyes glistened, but he didn't cry. That restraint hurt more than tears would have. I had always believed he would never choose himself over me. The belief dissolved quietly, without drama. I didn't know how to stop it, Noah said, the words tumbling out as if they had been waiting. I didn't plan. Lucas cut him off with a sharp glance, then turned back to me. It's not what it looks like, he said, immediately contradicting himself with the desperation in his tone that I almost laughed. The phrase was so familiar it felt scripted, and yet the irony was undeniable. It was exactly what it looked like, a boundary crossed, a trust eroded not by one moment, but by many. I wondered how long I had been edited out of their conversations, how often my absence had been convenient. I don't need details, I said, and meant it. Details would only give my imagination more tools to hurt me. I need space. Lucas reached out, then stopped himself. The restraint seemed newly learned, awkward on him. Noah stepped back, as if remembering where he was allowed to stand. The choreography of guilt unfolded in front of me, careful and insufficient that I turned toward the hallway, every step measured. My legs felt distant, like they belonged to someone else. Halfway down the hall, I paused, not because I wanted to look back, but because I needed to say one thing while I could still say it without breaking. I trusted you, I said, not naming either of them. The sentence found its targets anyway. Neither replied. Silence answered for them, complete and unforgiving. I grabbed my jacket from the hook, the motion automatic, and opened the door. Cool air rushed in, clean and unburdened. For a moment, I considered slamming it, giving sound to what I felt. Instead, I closed it gently. The click felt final. Outside, the rain had slowed to a mist. The streetlights blurred into soft halos, and the city resumed its indifferent rhythm. I walked without direction, letting distance do what words could not. With each step, the image of Noah's eyes followed me, apologetic, exposed, telling me everything he hadn't dared to say. By the time I reached the corner, my phone vibrated. I didn't check it. Whatever waited there could wait longer. Some truths needed silence before they could be faced. I kept walking, carrying the weight of what I now knew, aware that leaving was only the beginning, and that the hardest part, choosing what came next, was still ahead. The first night away from the apartment stretched longer than it should have. I slept on a borrowed couch, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like detergent and unfamiliar air. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by images I didn't invite. When morning arrived, it felt less like a beginning than a checkpoint. I woke knowing that avoidance had an expiration date. Messages waited on my phone, their presence heavier than their content. Lucas had written carefully, spacing his words as if that might soften them. He asked if I was safe, if we could talk, if I would come home. Noah sent one message only, short and unadorned, apologizing without explanation. I read them once and put the phone down. Silence, I decided, would be my boundary until I could trust my own voice again. 2 days passed before I agreed to see Lucas. We chose a neutral place, a quiet cafe that smelled of espresso and damp coats. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting rigidly at a small table, his hands folded as if in prayer. He looked smaller, diminished by guilt and lack of sleep. For the first time in years, I felt taller than him. Thank you for coming, Lucas said, standing too quickly, then sitting back down when he realized I wasn't going to hug him. I nodded and took the chair across from him. The space between us felt deliberate, engineered. I wanted it that way. For a moment, we watched steam curl from our cups, the ritual almost mocking in its normalcy. I owe you the truth, Lucas began. I held his gaze, steady and unyielding. I don't want a performance, I said. I want honesty. He exhaled, long and shaky. It didn't start as anything physical, he said, as if that distinction mattered more to him than it did to me. It was conversations. Late ones. I felt seen in a way I didn't realize I was missing. The words stung not because they were cruel, but because they were plausible. I recognized the trap of emotional intimacy, how easily it can masquerade as innocence. You were seen, I replied quietly. You just chose to be seen by someone else. Lucas winced. He nodded, once. I know. I crossed a line. More than one. I should have stopped. I should have told you. Yes, I said, the agreement sharp and clean. You should have. He reached for his cup, hands trembling slightly. I don't want to lose you, he said. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I considered him then, really considered what he was asking. Whatever it takes often meant patience, forgiveness, rebuilding on terms that favored the one who broke things. I wasn't sure I could afford that cost. I need time, I said. And I need to know that the life I imagine with you isn't something you already left behind. Lucas nodded again, slower this time. I haven't, he said, but his certainty sounded practiced that we parted without resolution, which felt honest. Some endings refuse to be neat, and some beginnings are postponed rather than denied. As I stepped back into the street, I felt lighter for having spoken, heavier for what remained unresolved. Later that evening, I met Noah. He suggested a park bench by the river, a place we used to sit when conversations mattered. He arrived early and stood when he saw me, uncertainty written across his face. The familiar sight hurt in a new way. I'm sorry, Noah said immediately. I don't expect forgiveness. I sat beside him, leaving space. Why? I asked, the question stripped of accusation. I wanted to understand the breach, not excuse it. Noah stared at the water. Because it felt safe, he said. Because I told myself it wasn't hurting anyone as long as it stayed quiet. Because I was wrong. The honesty landed without drama. I appreciated that, even as it confirmed the loss. You were my safe place, I said. And you knew that. He nodded, eyes bright but steady. I did. That's what makes it unforgivable. We sat in silence, the river carrying reflections past us. I realized then that some relationships don't end with anger, but with clarity. The absence of rage didn't mean the absence of consequence. I need distance, I said finally. From both of you. Not as punishment. As protection. Noah accepted this without protest. I'll be here if you ever want to talk, he said, and I believed he meant it. Whether that future existed was another question. Weeks passed. I moved back into the apartment only long enough to collect my things. Lucas wasn't there. The quiet felt earned. I arranged my life smaller at first, cautious and deliberate. Friends checked in. Work resumed its rhythm. Trust, I learned, doesn't return all at once. It arrives in fragments, if at all. One evening, as I walked home under a sky just beginning to clear, I felt something unfamiliar and welcome, steadiness that didn't depend on anyone else's choices. The memory of Noah's eyes and Lucas's voice still followed me, but they no longer dictated my direction. That I didn't know whether this story would circle back, whether forgiveness would one day feel possible, or whether distance would become permanent. What I knew was simpler and stronger. I had opened the door early and seen the truth. Now, I was choosing when, and if, to open another.